Hi, I'm Max Borders, author of the Social Singularity, and I am the executive director of Social Evolution, which is an organization dedicated to basically all things decentralization. The blockchain allows you to make decisions and have those decisions be recorded on a ledger, and it also allows for the governance mechanism to be instantiated. When you do that, one of the newest DAO products involves a decision engine that has associated with it a prediction market. Okay, and a prediction market means that people have skin in the game. I don't know if you're familiar with this term. If you have a similar in Czech.
Skóří na trh.
Okay.
Skin on the market, we say.
Exactly. You want to have skin in the game with respect to decisions, because the more people are disconnected from what decisions are to be made, the less likely they are to have knowledge or requisite skill with respect to those decisions. They might vote their ideals, but they can be completely clueless about the effects of those decisions.
Yeah.
So they tend to want to vote their feelings or vote to project that they're good, but they don't actually have to bear the cost of those decisions at all. But when you have a prediction market, it's associated more with people who have skin in the game, so they're much more careful and investigate much more the kind of decisions they're making, including the potential outcomes of that decision. So when I say democracy is not something I'm interested in, or that the book doesn't cover, it means it in the most macro sense. Like, if the stopping point of humanity is democracy, I'm not interested in it.
You're not satisfied.
If you want to use it on a local level, then that's okay.
How about democracy that is upgraded in a way that works for more people, that are not the democracy that is not divisive as the one that we are having right now?
Democracy, as such, no matter the size of the jurisdiction, is based on the idea of majoritarian rule. Even if you can, make ordering functions where you get your second choice or you get your third choice, or there are these other ways of doing it. There's liquid democracy where you can have delegative proxies for your vote and things like that. But ultimately, minority opinion and minority self-determination has to be suppressed to a very great degree. But if you have a whole host of different governance options for people, you can experiment with them, you can enter into them, experiment with them, and see which ones work better, and then you can achieve some sort of stasis. And it may be that two very different systems of governance coexist. They do around the world all the time. As long as it's peaceful, that seems to be, a good way. So, now, sometimes there have to be unitary decisions made on behalf of all people. Maybe you believe that there are just certain global decisions where a unitary decision must be made for a direction of humanity. So you need to get some sort of international consensus and global unanimity among nations to cut carbon dioxide emissions, for example. That's your example, right? That might be one of the few that is even plausible, but because most of the time we're talking about the way we want to live and the rules under which we want to live on a day-to-day basis, not a sort of sweeping big international or planetary scale decision. So I get the feeling, and I want to ask you, is that one of the ones that people keep bringing up with respect to asking that big question that's like the global question?
Like here in the US, people have asked a lot of various questions. Like I think 3 that repeated themselves was how come that we don't get along, or how to make it possible that we get along? How do people kill each other? And how to
why people kill each other?
Why people kill each other? And how to facilitate the state of affairs where there is peace. Basically, those questions repeated themselves. And what you just said, I was wondering, the set of rules that you would like to live under. Could you describe it a little bit, like elaborate on the type of society or community that you yourself would like to kind of succumb to, or not succumb, but participate in?
Yeah, I mean, for me, so there are three different levels of question there. Maybe more, maybe less, but let's just try to boil it down to two. One level is the particular set of rules that I would want to live in, and one is a meta question about the set of rules that are available to me to try out. And that's the one I'm most interested in, is that meta question. There's a tendency around the world for power to move up instead of locally. I would like to see that changed, inverted. I would like to see most of the planet look much more like Switzerland than like Germany, say, since you're neighbors, or even the EU. You know, it's very.
Subsidiarity works pretty well.
Subsidiarity is a key thing. I would like to see a world of much more subsidiarity, and where the power accretion doesn't tend to go upward, so that you're blanketing with either a regulatory state or with some set of rules or whatever on an entire geography like Europe, where you have so much variation in culture and language and religion and everything else. So, and indeed the economic states, like economic issues like harmonizing currencies and so on. I would like to see much more variation in the rules.
Yep.
And much more greater access to rules, different sets of rules. And secondly, my ideal is that fewer and fewer of those rule sets be tied to territory. Because that is such an accident of history of conquest and imposition. Why shouldn't we be able to choose? Why should I have to? I mean, the United States healthcare system is a mixed bag of shit. Very good health outcomes, but way too expensive and way too corrupt. Okay?
And inaccessible also.
And inaccessible for a lot of people. Yeah. It's ultimately accessible by everyone because there are certain laws that make that the case. But I think, for example, Singapore's healthcare system is the best in the world. Some would say France's healthcare system is the best in the world. I say it's Singapore. Let me try the Singapore system. Why can't I opt into the Singapore system? Why must I accept the system that is given to me by accident of birth rather than by choice? So, thinking of governance rules as membership clubs rather than imposed jurisdictional blankets is a huge thing for me, and how you would see in the book.
So you see that like the rules are emerging like bottom up. It's a bottom up process. That like people themselves decide what they want to like replicate in their community somehow.
Sure. Yeah.
And then
and they'll be forced, because when you can vote with your boat or vote with your feet, that is much more powerful than going to a voting booth and trying to express your preference as a blur among millions of other people. I call it crying your teardrop in the ocean and expecting the tide to turn. It's just not. That's democracy. Now, if it's highly local, and you've got a community of people where you can get more unanimity, closer to unanimity, and consensus, like like you guys' process describes. To me, that works better locally because there are cultural similarities, but the ability to exit a system that's not working forces change much more readily than having to vote with a system that is permanent. If there are indeed questions that require a unitary decision on behalf of the entire planet, then you can have like climate change. Then you can have a governing body or some sort of consensus mechanism that covers just that issue. But everything else would be federalized, or better, done through polyarchy, where you can opt into different systems, and those systems aren't attached to territory. So, for example, if I wanted to adopt the Singaporean system of government, or at least their healthcare system, of course you're going to have, issues with implementation that are really tough. Like with a healthcare system, what doctors are willing to do and accept. You can't force them into slave labor, and they might just say, no, I don't recognize your system, and I'm not going to take your insurance card or your whatever. But in the abstract, under sort of all things being equal conditions, a more idealized situation would be that the United States government, for example, not impose a healthcare system on me, but allow me to choose from among different systems. And that's so many aspects of our lives can be governance systems that we can opt into, and I don't think people are quite ready yet for that insight. But I hope to persuade them that it's possible, and that through technological means, relatively simple.
In one of the speeches we saw yesterday, actually, you described this way towards social singularity as a spiral, in a way. And I was thinking about this question when I was reading Harari, Homo Deus, or when I was listening to you yesterday. I was thinking, like, coming back to ecological collapse or climate change issues that we have, like, I would be scared that this whole process can be somehow interrupted by this, like, Mother Nature kind of will, and it would make the society, like, drop back to the previous stages, lawlessness, rulelessness, and weird kind of situations. Have you, like, of course you have thought of that, but, like, I would like to hear some insights on that from you.
I mean, I'm very suspicious of an idea that a global committee or community could impose a global carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas regime on the entire planet, and have it A, be politically palatable, B, operate efficiently and effectively, C, have no defections on the part of member states, much less normal people. I just think that, I'm just skeptical on different grounds, not governance grounds. Well, certainly governance grounds in the form of defector states. That's a huge problem. There's so many incentives on the part of developing countries not to abide by any sort of Kyoto Protocol or Paris Agreement.
Yeah.
I think there's plenty to be done. Let's accept that climate change is happening and that it could be catastrophic. I think there are wonderful win-win mechanisms that might be developed through tokenizing things. There's a project now called Nori, which is a climate change abatement token, and it creates incentives that encourage greenhouse emitters to introduce measures to mitigate their levels of emissions. And so I would put my money on the entrepreneurs and innovators way before I would the politicians.
Mm-hmm.
Even if that's a scientific adaptation. But we got to have some jurisdictions where that kind of vibrant sector of whether it's scientific or technological means of mitigating carbon or turning it into something else that's useful, and there's somebody's going to crack that. And I don't think it's going to be politicians. I think it's going to be innovators. The virtue of toleration, understanding that we're different and that we live among one another despite our differences peacefully. That's a huge one, and that's a good old liberal value. Being visionary, I think, is another value for me. It's like resisting the impulse to accept the status quo and to continuously look out on the horizon. That's one. I would say operating with integrity, which is it's it's a cluster of values really, but you know, honesty, operating with honesty, checking your sort of moral compass when you make a personal decision. I would also say what you might call ahimsa, which is from the Sanskrit word that means non-harm. So that in all that we try to do, we try not to harm others. In our personal dealings and in our trying to resolve conflict, that we try to find win-win-win situations and rules that give rise to win-win situations. Not only rules and systems, but in our personal dealings, that we try to do things in a way that doesn't harm anyone. And that's just try, because we can't always do that. And finally, I would say restrained empathy. And what I mean by that is empathy, trying to take on the perspective of another and feel that emotion and feel the way that sits with you is something that we don't practice enough. And I'm not saying that we should always, because sometimes people are being self-indulgent or pathological. But even if we understand, if we constrain our empathy, but try to feel the emotion from their perspective and in their context, we can get some insight about their humanity, their pain, their situation, and that's an important thing to cultivate in ourselves. Yeah. That, you know, shared understanding is one of the first steps to finding common ground, living together as human beings.